Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. I'm doing excellent. It's been a while since we recorded, or has it?
It actually hasn't. With the grand scheme of things, it feels like that because I've been, the listeners won't know it, but I have been traveling for a few days and we just haven't really caught up in that time span. But
Right.
all in all, we're still on our regular scheduled programming of regular recordings.
We are. It's been only a little bit more than a week since we last recorded. But yeah, I feel like whenever you travel, it always makes it seem longer. Just so the listeners know, we've hinted at this, but we record these things so far in advance at this point that we're very hesitant to make any contemporary references to anything, because by the time the episode comes out, it's like 6, 7, 8 weeks later, and it's like pretty out of date. Like, I think the episode that aired most recently, which was one of the Hulk episodes, I think we were talking about like the Oscars.
Yeah, it's always fun whenever we make hot takes so far in the past that when it actually gets published, we're either right or very wrong.
And if we're right, then it seems like retrospective hindsight. It's like, I don't know. But, oh, by the way, this is why wasn't it better? I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I am your co-host, Anton Pross. And we have quite an episode to get into today with a film that is a fun genre that we've been really enjoying covering on this show.
It's been a lot more fun covering these films than I initially thought it would be, because I hadn't seen any disaster film in a very long time before we restarted this podcast.
Yeah.
You know, we first did Airport, I think way back in season 2, and then last season we did Poseidon Adventure, and today it is the biggest disaster film from the 1970s. This is the big one. This is the 50th anniversary of the Towering Inferno.
Ooh, big film and a classic film, fair to say.
I think it's definitely a classic. I would say this and Poseidon Adventure are the two most well-known disaster films from that era.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a younger listener and you haven't seen this movie, you've probably at least heard of the premise, which is a giant building catches on fire and burns a lot of movie stars. Because that's it. That's really all the plot is.
It really is, but there's a little bit more in there, and I feel like that's what kind of ties together this film of like
there's a lot more in there.
Yeah, and it doesn't all get caught up in flames. It really does. No. It really does shine.
Yes. And when we say there's a lot more in here, we do mean there's a lot, because this movie is 2 hours and 44 minutes.
Yeah, it's a doozy, but
yeah,
like we said, there's a lot to dig into, not just the length of the film and this star-studded cast. It'll be a good time.
Yes. We will get to the Towering Inferno in a second, but first, some really quick admin. As always, if you like what you hear and you have not already done so, please give us a follow, a like, a subscription. We would surely appreciate it. And just a reminder that if you really like what you hear, you have the option to contribute to our podcast monetarily, especially if you're listening on Spotify. There is a donation link that is in the bottom of each episode description that if you are feeling quite generous, please feel free to contribute. Our listeners are wonderful. We love each and every one of you, and all the support that we have gotten so far has been tremendous, and we thank you very much.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm loving all the comments that we're getting. I love all of the suggestions, questions, just comments, and overall engagement. So please keep it coming, folks.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to give a shout out to a very thoughtful YouTube listener who I believe is a gentleman by the name of Everett. He always gives us very thoughtful, very generous feedback. on every one of our episodes that we put on YouTube. And we love that kind of feedback. It's great. It's always thoughtful. It's always lengthy. It's just great stuff. It's the kind of feedback that we really strive for. So thank you very much. And I think we can do something a little bit different this week, Anton. I think we should announce next week's episode now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we're really changing it up.
Yeah. I had actually some feedback from a couple listeners that we always announce next week's film at the end of the episode, and they felt that it would be helpful to do it towards the beginning as well. So we can do that.
Sure.
Next week is going to be Iron Man 3.
That's right. Say hello to Tony Stark.
That's right. There's a lot of Tony Stark in Iron Man 3. Makes sense.
And we do have a guest for that episode, friend of the show, Garrett.
Yes, he was on earlier to defend that awful Hulk film.
Yes, Ang Lee's Hulk. But before we dive back into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we are going to take a journey to the Bay Area, back to San Francisco, at least for certain shots, for this week's film.
That's right. The Towering Inferno is technically a San Francisco movie.
Yes, it is.
Do you rank it highly on your list of San Francisco movies, Anton? Oh, by the way, and just in case the listeners don't know, Anton is from the Bay Area. That's why I ask this.
Yeah, I'll say this, it doesn't display a lot of the Bay Area, a few pretty iconic shots.
No, it doesn't.
It mainly is just that building, which also a lot was on a soundstage. But I'd say, it's up there. Like somewhere up there, maybe like top 30. It's in the top 30 somewhere.
Top 30 San Francisco movie.
To be fair, there actually haven't been a ton of San Francisco films actually filmed on location.
Really? I guess maybe you're right. I feel like it's a great location for movies, but
it's a great location, but compared to New York, there's actually a lot more red tape and what is it? There's actually more taxes that need to be paid to film in San Francisco. So actually, a lot of on-set location ends up being put aside because of that.
That's not surprising, actually, now that you put it that way.
But for the films that we do get, pretty great.
Yeah. Well, let's start this one, Anton.
So, The Towering Inferno, a classic 1970s disaster movie about a fire that breaks out in a state-of-the-art San Francisco skyscraper during the opening ceremony attended by a host of A-list guests. An overworked fire chief and the building's architect must cooperate in the struggle to save lives and subdue panic while a corrupt, cost-cutting contractor tries to evade responsibility for the disaster. Released on December 16, 1974 by 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers. Directed by John Gillerman. Screenplay by Sterling Siliphant, based on the novels The Tower by Richard Martin Stern and The Glass Inferno by Thomas N. Scorsese and Frank M. Robinson. Starring, and this is not everyone, but quite the short list of Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, William Holden, Faye Dunaway, Fred Astaire, Jennifer Jones, Susan Blakely, Richard Chamberlain, O.J. the Juice Simpson, Robert Vaughn, Robert Wagner, Susan Flannery, Gregory Sierra, and Dabney Coleman. So a budget of $14 million, $86 million adjusted for inflation, with a box office of $203 million, $1.25 billion adjusted for inflation. So The Towering Inferno.
One of the most profitable, most successful movies of the 1970s.
And it's just astounding when we get that adjustment for inflation. Just not only the amount, but like you said, that is an incredible profit margin. But here we are today, The Towering Inferno. We touched on it a little bit that we've had a lot of fun covering disaster films. But Pat, why are we covering this film today?
Disaster movies are fun to watch and even more fun to talk about. And I teased this a little bit before in the intro, like you mentioned, but I had not seen this film in at least 20 years, not since I was a kid. My grandparents had it on VHS, so I watched it a few times with them when I was young, and I had probably seen it on TV at some point. I'm talking like the 1990s, but very similar to Airport, very similar to the Poseidon Adventure. It had been a long time, and I wasn't sure how it would hold up, right? Because, both of us really liked Airport. We liked Poseidon Adventure even more, and, there were some things in there that date those films, especially in Airport, because it definitely seemed like it was made in the 50s, even though it came out in 1970. So I did not know what to expect from this film, right? It could have been hit or miss, but I knew one thing. You read off the cast,
Right.
I didn't actually think about this, but this might be the most impressive cast I've seen in a movie that we've covered so far on this podcast.
I mean, each disaster film already sounds like it's the Avengers of whoever is in Hollywood that they're trying to put together for the film, but this legit feels like an Avengers level, like, casting.
It's a great comparison. This is the 1974 equivalent of an Avengers movie. The Towering Inferno is the biggest, the longest, the most star-studded, and the most financially successful of the disaster movies from the 1970s, right? This is the peak of the disaster genre. This was as big as a movie got in 1974. This film was pretty fascinating to rewatch for me for a number of reasons, but I think specifically for that, watching it 50 years after it comes out, just knowing like this was as big as it got back then, other than something like perhaps a film we already covered last season, Cleopatra, which came out over a decade before this, which was, just a financial black hole for
Right.
20th Century Fox. Because I noticed that 20th Century Fox also co-produced this. Interestingly enough, which we'll get into in the production history, they
Mhm.
co-produced this was with Warner Brothers, which is extremely rare even today for two major studios to collaborate like this.
Well, of course, each of them had a piece to the puzzle that they needed to put together to actually make the film.
Right. And I suppose you could say the Captain America of this Avengers movie was the producer and the co-director of this film, Irwin Allen. We really sang his praises on the Poseidon Adventure
Mhm.
episode. He was nicknamed the Master of Disaster. He has a tremendous legacy both in television and he didn't invent the disaster genre of that era, which I really think
Mhm.
you could credit to Airport, but he really took it to the next level with Poseidon Adventure and this film. He was really a pioneer. The Towering Inferno represented his greatest success. It was not just the box office numbers. We hadn't mentioned this yet, but this film was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture.
Mhm.
It won 3 awards. It did not win Best Picture. The Godfather 2 won that year. I mean, very understandably. But the fact that this was nominated is just another piece of just how enormously successful this film was.
And one other piece there, we don't really get disaster films being Oscar nominated nowadays, so that
No.
just goes to show the caliber of film this film, stands in.
So you may be wondering at this point, if this movie was so successful, why are we covering it? Well, number one, these types of movies are just fun to cover, but
Mhm.
there was a backlash against these types of movies. Negative reputation that these movies, we talked about it on Airport and Poseidon Adventure that, well, they're corny, they have cheesy plots, it's just relying on talent. There's no real substance to these films. And having rewatched these types of films, Anton, for the podcast, I've never really agreed with that. I think there is some real drama in these films. As yes, there is some cheese factor as well.
And I think it's where when we see the drama done well and we see the sincerity of it in these excellent film examples, we'll always argue for it. But fair to say, the template for these disaster films also created a template for films that tried to mimic that same emotion and probably came off a bit more gorgonzola than we'd like.
Yes, concur with you on that.
I mean, even though Irwin Allen, of course, the master of disaster, after this film came out with The Swarm, which also in the disaster category, but did not quite land the same way.
No, it's safe to say this was the peak of Allen's career. He never would produce anything as successful as this again. Back to that cast. When we say star-studded, we mean it. Paul Newman and Steve McQueen were 2 of the biggest male movie stars in the world at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I would throw Robert Redford in there as well, Burt Reynolds, Dustin Hoffman. Anybody else I'm forgetting? I think it really those 5, if you're talking 1970s, they were the champs.
A young John Voight.
Yeah, you can include him in there. And then Faye Dunaway, probably the biggest female star in the world at that time. This was the peak of her career,
Yep, absolutely.
which we'll touch on a little bit later. And I want to give a special shout out to William Holden. He was past his prime by the time this film came out, but in the 1950s, he was one of, if not the biggest male movie star in the world. He is a name that I don't think he will be as well known to the average moviegoer today as a name like Paul Newman or Steve McQueen or Robert Redford, but I always want to call attention to Holden because I'm a big fan of his, and I think he was a tremendous actor, and I've just never really seen him give a performance that I disliked.
I mean, there's quite a few films you could even list out and say the man is absolutely a classic actor in Hollywood. Sabrina just comes to mind because it's one of my favorite films of his, but that doesn't even touch on his longevity in the industry as well. Because he started pretty early, way before
He did.
1974.
Yeah, he started in the 1940s. He really peaked in the 1950s. He was in some very famous stuff, like you mentioned Sabrina, Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, The Bridge on the River Kwai. That's probably the stuff he's best known for. Later in his career, he was obviously in this movie. He's in The Wild Bunch, very famous Western film.
Mhm.
And probably my favorite performance of his, no, not probably, definitely my favorite performance of his actually came out after this film, 2 years later in Network, which he was in with Faye Dunaway. Peter Finch famously won the Best Actor Academy Award for that film, but I stand by the fact that Holden should have won Best Actor for that film. That he is incredible in that film. And we'll get to it a little bit later, but he died. He was not that old when he died. He passed away in 1981, rather gruesomely, which I will
Mm.
touch on. But rest of the cast, loaded. Absolutely loaded. Famous faces and character actors left and right. You had old school stars, right? Like Fred Astaire,
Legend.
absolute legend. And then we had up and comers like OJ Simpson.
Who, funny enough, is born and raised in San Francisco.
Oh, that's right. Yes. I had forgotten. I knew he was in this film, but I always remembered it as like a cameo. But no, he has like a role in
Yeah.
this movie.
Yeah, he's an important part of the team.
He is, yeah. He has an actual role. I don't know, was this his first film? It had to be one of them because he was still playing at this point, obviously.
He was still playing, and not only that, he was coming off of an MVP year, so
Oh,
he
shoot.
was red hot.
I did not know that. Okay. Yeah, so this I guess this I don't want to make light of the situation, but this wasn't necessarily the peak of his career, but
No, not quite the peak. I mean, in terms of films, this was the second that he'd done. He'd had another film in 1974, The Klansman, but a lot of maybe a few of our older listeners may remember him from his appearance in Roots. That was, I think, a lot of folks remember him from that.
I remember him most from The Naked Gun.
That too.
Yeah. But this is without question the biggest movie that he was in.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah. It's interesting too. As much as we have been tapping this film up, it's gotten a lot of mockery, even from its lead actors. You know, Newman and McQueen famously said that they only did this movie for the money. William Holden called it lousy.
I kind of wonder if maybe they could kind of get a sense of, we know what this formula is for.
I think they're being harsh on it. There was no way we weren't going to cover this film. After we did Airport and Poseidon Adventure, like there was no way we weren't going to do this one.
No way. This is already a lot of fun. We haven't even gotten into the production history yet, and there's so much about this film already.
Yeah, there is some juicy stuff that you can read about this film, and we're going to go over it so you don't have to read it. Let's do the production history. We'll wind the clocks back to April of 1973. After the incredible success of the Poseidon Adventure, producer Irwin Allen was looking for his next project. 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, and Columbia Pictures had been in a bidding war for the film rights to Richard Martin Stern's The Tower prior to that book's publication. So before this book even came out, you had 3 movie studios who were looking to purchase the film rights. Now, Irwin Allen, who was at Fox at the time, he was disappointed to learn that Warner Brothers had outbid the other studios. They paid the author $300,000 for the film rights. That's $300,000 in 1974. So
Wow.
$3 million-ish in today's money.
That's
How much these film studios were trying to capitalize on the disaster genre at this point.
that's all right. It's a little bit of pocket change.
Yeah, not bad. It wouldn't be bad today either. 8 weeks later, Fox was submitted a novel. This is The Glass Inferno, written by Thomas N. Scorsia and Frank M. Robinson. And Irwin Allen said that it, quote, had the same sort of characters, the same locale, the same story, and the same conclusion, end quote. So Fox bought the novel for a reported fee of $400,000. Both novels were inspired by the construction of the World Trade Center in the early 1970s and what could happen with a fire in the skyscraper. That's pretty ominous.
Very, very ominous.
Yeah, for sure. Irwin Allen was concerned that 2 films about a tall building on fire might cannibalize each other. This is a really impressive bit of work on his part. He convinced the two studios to join together to make a single film on the subject. Now, this would have been a very big deal at the time, and I would imagine so now, right? I
Mhm.
wouldn't call Titanic a new movie at all. It was obviously 25 years ago, but if you recall, Anton, that was co-financed by Fox and Paramount.
Yeah.
So
Big
this type of co-financing from the two major studios like this, it doesn't happen often.
It doesn't, and I can see why. There's always it's always going to be a big legal battle of who's going to make more money at the end of the day.
Right.
And then also it's a question of long term, what are the distribution rights, what are the syndication rights? There's a lot there.
Well, due to the audacity of Allen, they were able to hash this out pretty easily, it sounds like. Fox and Warner Brothers, they issued a joint press release announcing a single film collaboration in October of 73. They decided to co-finance the budget equally, but the film would be made at Fox, where Allen was based. Fox would distribute the film in the United States and Canada, and Warner Brothers handled every other territory as well as the TV distribution rights. Sterling Siliphant, who had written The Poseidon Adventure, he was hired to adapt the two novels into a workable screenplay. Now, incidents and character names were taken from both novels, and this guy, John Gillerman, was hired to direct. We're going to get into John Gillerman a little bit later. Lead actors Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, they were each paid $1 million. Both actors demanded top billing. Now, to provide dual top billing, the opening credits were arranged diagonally, with McQueen in the lower left and Newman in the upper right. So thus, each appeared to have first billing, depending on whether the credit was read left to right or top to bottom. William Holden also demanded top billing, but he was refused. He
Uh,
agreed to do the film. I know, poor William. He agreed to do the film in exchange for a better percentage of the box office. And as a result, he actually ended up earning more money than McQueen or Newman. So maybe not poor William.
yeah, he did fine.
Yeah. Irwin Allen originally wanted Steve McQueen to play the part of the architect Doug Roberts. However, McQueen fought for and he got the role of Fire Chief O'Halloran. So the role of Doug Roberts went to Paul Newman. McQueen trained with real firefighters to prepare for his role. In his ride-alongs with the LA Fire Department, McQueen actually took part in putting out a fire.
Fun fact, as a part of being on the Towering Inferno, Paul Newman actually started to include more smokier flavors as part of his own line of Paul Newman's own different salad dressings.
Is that true?
No, but principal photography took place over 14 weeks from May to August 1974. Now, Faye Dunaway was often late to the set or didn't appear at all. This made some scenes impossible to film and caused other actors, such as William Holden and Jennifer Jones, to become quite upset. Holden reportedly shoved Dunaway against a wall one day and threatened her. And for the next month, she had a perfect attendance record. Now, director John Gillerman said that Newman and McQueen were very good to work with and added considerably to their roles. Desperate to capture a truly surprise reaction from the cast, Irwin Allen actually fired a handgun into the ceiling without warning the actors, who were understandably, quote, surprised. The building used in the film was a series of miniatures and matte paintings. Only sections of the building were actually constructed for the actors and stunt people to perform their scenes. Interior shots of the building were of San Francisco's Hyatt Regency. Exterior shots used the Bank of America building at 555 California Street, with an additional 50 stories of matte paintings added. The largest set constructed for the movie was the Promenade Room, the site of the party on the 135th floor. It covered a total area of 11,000 square feet, was 25 feet high, and enclosed by a 340-foot cloth painted to resemble the San Francisco skyline. The set was around 10 feet off the ground to allow the water in the climax to be drained off, and also to give a sense of height to the shots of people being forced through the windows. And the set cost $300,000. The giant matte painting of the San Francisco skyline was later reused in the background of Kirk's apartment in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and Star Trek III: The Search for Spock.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that is awesome.
How much would you like to own that?
I don't know if I'd like it $300,000 worth, but I'll do a bidding of starting at $100.
Okay.
I don't think I'll get any callbacks for that.
How big was it? 340-foot cloth?
It's
amazing.
It's massive. I mean, and it looked great.
It did. It really did.
Yeah. So effects expert L.B. Abbott was mindful of how poorly fire would scale in miniature shots. So to combat that in this movie, he had the building miniature made large and rigged with a system of jets for the points on fire. One jet for butane, so bluish film with no smoke, one for acetylene, orange flame with smoke, and another jet for air. The air would agitate the flames and keep it from bunching up like a smaller flame would. Combining and tuning all these jets made for a better, in scale, look for the fires on the building miniature. And the production spent over $1 million on the miniature effects. Producer Irwin Allen directed most of the action sequences, enough so that he received a co-director credit. Or did he? We'll get back to that. Allen got most of the critical kudos, which annoyed the direct. Quote, "I wanted to fight it because, damn it, I made the picture," end quote, said Gillerman. Quote, "But I let the studio talk me out of it. They said it would only hurt business, but I was wrong. I should have fought," end quote. And we get some of our legendary John Williams, who composed a score for the film, and the Academy Award-winning song "We May Never Love Like This Again" was composed by Al Kasha and Joel Hirshhorn, and performed by Maureen McGovern, who appeared in a cameo as a lounge singer. And on the Scores soundtrack album, which features the film recording plus the commercially released single version. Additionally, the theme tune is interpolated into the film's underscore by Williams.
The song itself is awful.
Yeah, it's not great.
It won the Oscar though somehow.
I didn't love it, but it does feel like a song from the 1970s. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. That being said, there's plenty of wonderful music from the 1970s.
Yeah, agree.
But these are the same duo that wrote The Morning After, the song in the Poseidon Adventure, which was equally terrible.
I'm gonna say that song gets really iffy.
Did you enjoy my brother's music?
I didn't mention this during the Poseidon Adventure, but it's just so funny that song gets referenced in the South Park really early on.
Yes, it does. By Butters.
But well, it's what they use to. It actually summons, I think, demons, because there's a succubus that's trying to marry Chef, and they sing that song constantly.
I did not know that. That's
Yeah, it is it's a classic episode. I think it's season 1 or 2, and that was when I first heard that song. So I don't know why I didn't just mention it until today, but fun fact.
That is a fun fact. And this probably goes without saying, but The Towering Inferno ended up as the highest grossing film of 1974.
So quite a bit of production, and I don't think that's the end of it. We're going to probably be chatting even more about this production.
Yeah, we're going to
we definitely are.
Yeah, we're going to sprinkle it in. Anton, it's time to talk about why wasn't it better?
Let's do it. What's number 1, Pat? What's our number 1 reason?
Well, it's the cast. In some ways, this is one of the film's strengths, because it really is one of the most impressive casts in the history of cinema. But I think it ends up being a blessing and a curse. Let me explain. The blessing is obvious, right? It's pretty awesome to see so many stars on screen together. But the curse is there really are too many characters. I have the characters list, and do you want to try to refer to them by their character names or just by the actors' names?
I think the actors' names probably easier, because it was way harder for me to even remember what their names were in the film.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you say that too, because so Newman's character, by the way, I'm with you. We should probably just stick to the actors' names. But really quick, Newman's character is Doug Roberts, right? They say his name pretty frequently throughout the film. But I rewatched this twice to prepare for this episode. They don't say McQueen's character's name very much at all. It's O'Halloran. I think they maybe referred to him by name like 2 times in the entire length of the film. He keeps getting referred to as like chief by his like subordinates. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know where I'm going with this, but
Well, I think it just goes to show that it is a detriment. It can be a detriment if there's too many characters, and this is quite a large cast. And
yeah.
especially when you have star power like Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, unless the film's great, you're always just going to see it as, oh, Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. What are they doing?
Right. I mentioned this on the Poseidon Adventure episode too, but for all the ridiculous stuff that happens in this movie, ultimately though, the cast is the biggest strength, because as cheesy as this film gets in parts, anything with Paul Newman and Steve McQueen in it, I can watch. They really are, like, there's a reason these guys are legends. They can pretty much sell anything, no matter how ridiculous it is, and they do so here. And we mentioned they made serious money from this. They had the $1 million salaries each. They also got a percentage of the box office. Interestingly enough, it was supposed to be a 2-picture deal. So Newman made the second film with Irwin Allen a few years later. It's a volcano disaster movie called When Time Ran Out. McQueen stiffed Irwin Allen, never made the second film.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I did not realize this. He took a 4-year hiatus from acting after making this film. So he was in the prime of his career. He would have only been 44 at the time of this film's release. He takes a 4-year hiatus. I had forgotten he died in 1980 of cancer. He was only 50 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad to know. I mean, such a legend.
Yeah, he had for dying so young, he had a pretty lengthy, distinguished career. He was in a lot of stuff. But this would have been probably the last real serious, big hit that he was ever in. Both leads, they did as many of their own stunts as they could. Both of them were injured. Newman burnt his hand filming a scene, and McQueen twisted his ankle badly while filming that elevator shaft scene where they're rappelling down. By the way, great scene.
It's just overall just the amount of hoops and just leaps and bounds that any of the stunt folks had to go through in this film is just amazing. And then, of course, even the actors doing their own stunts.
You can tell, too. Even in HD, it was really one of the things that stood out to me the most about this film is how much of the action Newman and McQueen were involved in. I really could not spot many stunt doubles.
And definitely, commend them for it. I think nowadays a lot of people look at it and see, well, if Newman had gotten too many third-degree burns, they would have had to shut production. So definitely a bit of a danger, a bit of cautiousness is definitely taken on films more nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we're pretty harsh on CGI in this podcast, but there's a lot of awesome things about CGI, and safety is probably the biggest one. You can do so many more things safely with CGI. And they would, if they made this movie now, which they wouldn't, it would be CGI all over the place. And I get it. I understand the need for that. But what's so cool about the making of this film, and by the way, you can watch some really good YouTube videos. There's some documentaries that they produced about the making of this film, about how much of a stickler Irwin Allen was for safety during the filming of this and the Poseidon Adventure. So there was at no point really where the actors were in serious danger. Like, yes, accidents happen, injuries happen, but Irwin Allen's first approach to everything was safety. Back to the actors, Anton. If you're going to recommend this film to anyone that hasn't seen it, which I would, it's the two leads. That's the biggest reason why. You have basically the two coolest movie stars in the world at the time, and they're in the same movie together, which just doesn't happen a lot. I'm trying to think, what's a modern day equivalent of Newman and McQueen?
Well, I always
Leo and Brad Pitt?
Yeah, Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, Leo and Brad Pitt. If you get
Denzel and Tom Hanks.
You get them both in a, usually, which is why it's also unique that this is co-studio produced, you'd have one competing film with one of them being the full lead for one studio versus the other. So getting them both, it does take a bit of balancing to be able to ensure that one performance doesn't overpower the other. And really impressive. I think they complemented each other fantastically.
Brilliantly. I love all their scenes together. Yeah, and so Newman was a little bit older, right? He was in his late 40s when this came out. I think, yeah, he might have been 50 when this came out. Can you Google that real quick? I'm kind of just curious for my own knowledge.
How old was Paul Newman in The Towering Inferno?
Yeah, I want to say he was about 50. So, he had been acting for a long time before this came out. His career goes back to the 1950s. But this is pretty cool to find out. So he was the first actor in motion picture history to have starred in 3 films that grossed more than $100 million. The other 2 being Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting.
So, quick check, he was 48 at the time.
Okay. Yeah, he had been around. He had been around for a long time. By the way, The Sting is one of my favorite movies.
Oh, The Sting? Classic.
Yeah, I love that movie. My dad introduced me to that movie at a very young age, and I've loved it ever since. It's an amazing movie.
I love doing the nose thing.
Yes. If anyone has not seen The Sting, I think it's on Netflix right now, but check it out. It's a great movie. Him and Robert Redford. Speaking of 2 huge co-stars in the same film.
Yeah, if you've never seen the film, you've seen it referenced in a lot of pop culture.
Oh yeah, you get Quint, Robert Shaw.
Yes, we do.
As the Mark.
If there are any younger listeners that may not recognize Paul Newman, just think Doc Hudson in Cars.
And Newman's Own, all the salad dressing and whatnot that you see at the supermarket.
Yeah.
But really, really a legend, all around great guy off screen too. Did a lot of charity work. That's of course what Newman's Own brand does. It's all charity related. Just a cool guy. One of the all-time greats. One of my favorite actors for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, all their scenes together are great. And that's why, this is a really long movie. Probably too long. but I'm glad for every minute that those two are on screen together.
I will argue that probably it was in the contract of getting enough screen time for the both of them that made the film feel so long. There was about like 3 or 4 major escapes that were failures that the both of them were involved in, that probably it could have been cut down to 2 if it was just one of the
Oh yeah.
major stars,
Yeah.
and I felt that. I definitely felt it. Like, not to say that there weren't really cool explosions or effects, or they really drew it out in those major scenes, but I felt like it was a lot, and it's because you have to give screen time to both these big stars.
I have to agree with you there. I have it written down later on in the notes, like what the stuff that I thought they could have cut out, but I agree with you. The female star in this film, Faye Dunaway, she does not have much to do in this film other than look good in that dress. You know, it's pretty
Right.
much a nothing role.
Yeah, not much in this film, but we did talk about Faye Dunaway for an earlier film in this season. When we talked about the Thomas Crown Affair.
That's right. You know, she's in the remake as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But another legend of the screen. This was the peak of her career in 1974. She was in this film and Chinatown, one of her most famous roles,
Mhm.
and The Four Musketeers. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I have. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. Directed by our guy Richard Lester, who went on to ruin Superman 2, in my opinion. Just kidding, but not really.
Not really, but that's a fun film.
It is. I wanted to call it out though, because to be in 3 films like this in the same year, that's as good as it gets for an actor. She would actually win her Oscar 2 years later for her performance in Network, in which, of course, I mentioned this. She plays the lover of none other than William Holden in that film.
Which is cool. It's a big MGM film from 1976.
It's a perfect movie, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Amazing. All right, it's time to talk about William Holden again. I was singing his praises earlier, but
Mhm.
I just want to emphasize this. He died so long ago that I fear many younger moviegoers probably are not aware of him. You know, someone like
Mhm.
Paul Newman, or much more recent, you know, Robert Redford is still alive. Of course, people, I'm sure they recognize Robert Redford. McQueen's legacy seemed to have survived. A lot of people seem to recognize Steve McQueen, even though he died actually before William Holden. But the reason I'm saying this is I want to talk about Holden because he really was every bit as big of a star as guys like Newman, McQueen, and Redford in his day. We mentioned the work that he did in the 50s. Interestingly enough, he was best man at Ronald Reagan's wedding in 1952 to Nancy. That was an interesting
That is a
historical tidbit.
fun little tidbit.
Yeah. Kind of doesn't surprise me when I see him in a movie like
No.
this. I don't know why. He sort of reminds you of Ronald Reagan. I don't know why.
I mean, fellow actor Ronald Reagan.
Yes, he was an actor.
Yeah.
What would you have thought if Ronald Reagan was in this film with OJ?
I honestly, I wouldn't have been shocked just because this film had everyone in it.
I feel like he really should have been in this film. Like if him and OJ were the two heads of security. I don't know why that would be funny, but it
That
just would.
It would be.
Like, Mr. Roberts, tear down this wall. I don't know if you saw this in the notes already, but do you know how old William Holden was when this was filmed?
I'm gonna guess he was William Holden 52?
Oh, no, he was 56.
Okay.
Okay. I was going to say he looked older.
But he did look much older.
He had a reputation for being a very serious drinker. He went hard in the paint. I don't know if he could have rivaled our guy Richard Burton. Doubtful, but you never know.
I'm curious to think about the templates for these kinds of films. I mean, his character definitely feels like characters from Poseidon Adventure, and then of course from Airport. So what is the archetype for his character? It's like the slightly
Kind of a scumbag.
kind of a scumbag, but that was the captain in Airport, kind of.
Yeah. Oh, Dean Martin's character?
Yeah,
Oh, but he comes around though.
but he comes around.
Yeah. Yeah, Holden's character in this film, but his name's Jim Duncan.
Mhm.
I feel like he gets off easy in the end.
Oh my gosh, it's
He's one of the biggest reasons why so many people end up dying.
not a sympathetic character at all, and
But they try to handle him like one at the end when he tells his daughter nothing like this is ever going to happen again. It's like, bro, this is most of the people are dead because you didn't want to evacuate them.
Nothing like this is ever happening again. They built the Salesforce Tower a few years ago.
I was hoping there was like gonna be a deleted scene where he tells his daughter-in-law, like, "Look, we're just gonna blame everything on your dead husband." That seems just
Uh,
like, I mean, I guess he is the real villain of the film, right? Richard Chamberlain's character.
right,
He is a
right.
legit scumbag in this
Oh,
film.
and they don't play around with it. Like, he just looks like a douche, and everything he says is like, "Well, you don't understand business around here, Paul Newman. Like, I do what I need to do to
Yeah.
get this building up."
He's so one-dimensional, but I think it is a pretty good performance from Chamberlain because he's just the second you see him on screen, you're like, "Scumbag."
Oh, it's immediate. It's like, I'm not supposed to like this guy.
But it's like his blue blazer. It's like, "Doug, what can I get you to drink?" It's like 10 in the morning. Real quick before we move on from William Holden, are you aware of how he died?
His drinking problem? Was that it?
Yes, but specifically of how he died.
No, please, like,
Okay.
let us know, Pat.
You are correct in saying it was related to a drinking problem, but he was hammered drunk in his condo. It's actually quite tragic. He fell at one point. He was by himself. He fell and cut his head on a glass coffee table, and it seems like he was so drunk that he didn't realize how seriously he was bleeding, and he probably fell asleep and he bled to death.
Ugh, that's just tragic.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I don't have enough good things to say about William Holden. It's one of my all-time favorite actors from that era of Hollywood, and
Mhm.
I will promote his legacy as many chances as I get on this podcast because he should be a name that more people recognize, in my opinion. But
I mean, also just one of the reasons I love what we do on this show is we're not just covering movies that are top of the box office in theaters right now. We're talking about films that are an important part of history, and that includes William Holden.
yes, and this will not be the last film with William Holden that we cover. Actually, it might. I don't know. I haven't verified that.
I mean, there's a
Yeah,
lot of films that
yeah.
William
Well,
Holden's been a part of, so I'm
yeah, we're
sure.
gonna cover Omen
Yeah.
too. Don't worry.
Oh, maybe we don't want to actually then.
I've seen worse. Can't
Yeah.
be worse than Exorcist too.
Yeah, it can't be.
Oh, speaking
It
of that,
really,
did
really
you see?
can't
There's
be.
a new Omen movie that's coming out. Did you see the trailer for this?
I'm not gonna bother watching it. I
The
didn't.
first Omen.
I think I saw like an ad online for it, and I was like, I don't even want to bother watching the trailer. Like, please just let this franchise just end.
I thought it was over. It was. It had to be over. How many Omen films are there? Like 5?
Well, it had to have peaked when there was actually like 666 back in like 2006.
Yeah, and that was terrible. The one with Liev Schreiber.
Yeah, it was
Yeah, it's an awful movie.
pretty horrible, but at least like, have it then and then
Yeah.
just end it. Like it ended on a gimmicky note, but they still come back.
Yo, you want a classic horror film? The original Omen is iconic.
Oh, I mean, of
Richard
course,
Donner.
such a cursed set.
Yeah. Like legitimately creepy, that movie.
Yeah, creepy movie, and then the behind the scenes equally creepy.
Yeah. It's all for you, Damien. It's all for you. It's
That
pretty
is,
intense for an old movie.
it's very dark.
Yeah. Anyway, where are we with Towering Inferno here?
We
Faye
were
Dunaway?
yeah, we were gonna talk about more of the stars in this film. I mean, so many legends, and we didn't even touch on Fred Astaire, Jennifer Jones.
Yeah. I'm not, I honestly, I have to admit, I was not too familiar with Jennifer Jones, but Fred Astaire for sure. They were both A-listers in their day. I think they were both nominated for Oscars for their work on this film. I thought they were both terrific.
Fred Astaire, of course, like he is probably like the one of the key faces of like the golden age of Hollywood.
Yeah,
And
musicals, dancing.
right, I mean, Shall We Dance, Funny Face. It's just I'm always going to have like a very special place in my heart for Fred Astaire. You don't really have actors like that anymore.
No, definitely not. No. Multi-talented guy.
Yeah.
And when we say he could dance, we mean it.
Oh yeah, we're not just saying like he could. Yeah, we're not joking around. Like this
Yeah.
guy's career he was what, quadruple threat just in terms of his abilities,
Yeah.
and I think that was just the standard that he lived by. Which, just a note about Fred Astaire, he was always known to be difficult to work with because he was very demanding.
Interesting. Something I wanted to say about Dunaway. She had been nominated for a couple Oscars before this film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most notably for Chinatown.
Right.
She finally wins her Oscar in 1976 for Network. After that, you would expect her career to get better, right?
I would assume so. That seems like a good trajectory.
It didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Quite the opposite, in fact. The reason why I bring this up is this very much reminded me of the discussion we were having about Elizabeth Taylor on the Cleopatra episode.
Mm-hmm.
She wins her second Oscar in 1966 for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, right? And her career kind of tanks after that. Same thing happened here with Dunaway. Very similar parallel. She was also 35. Also, like Elizabeth Taylor, she had a reputation as being extremely difficult to work with. We talked about, the stuff where she was late all the time, but
Mm-hmm.
I was reading stuff about she slapped people on set. Not necessarily this film, but other ones. She crashed a director's car while driving drunk. She threw a cup of her own urine in someone's face,
Oh,
allegedly.
classy.
Yeah, just kind of a nightmare. It
So
just really reminded me of the Elizabeth Taylor thing
Well,
on the Cleopatra episode. That's why I wanted to bring this up. It's like you would have expected her career to get better after winning an Oscar, and it didn't.
and let it be a lesson to all actors in Hollywood. Don't be difficult, or it'll end up biting you in the butt. Sorry, one sec. Can we pause real quick? I'm getting a call from my mechanic about the insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
We're back.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Had to get that settled. We're all good.
No problem. We are back. I think we left off. We're done with the first reason. I think we can move on to reason number 2, right? Which is pretty closely related, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, reason number 2. Were there too many characters?
Yeah, that's the curse of having this amazingly talented, huge cast. There's too many characters in the film.
Yeah.
I both appreciate all of the characters at the same time. Yeah, there are too many.
Yeah, and especially with that many characters and you're trying to build the stakes and sympathetic storylines across all those characters, and then you make one of the characters deaf, it really is hard to keep up.
Yes. Oh, I always forget about her. You barely see her. But I mean, yeah. So the rest of the cast, you mentioned some of the names when you did the intro. There are a lot of B-listers, but they're good B-listers. I don't want to undersell them. Robert Vaughn, Richard Chamberlain, Susan Blakely, Robert Wagner, who listeners would probably best recognize as number 2 from the Austin Powers trilogy. Richard Chamberlain, his character, whatever the heck his name is, Roger Simmons, he is the real villain of the film. Complete slimeball. His cost cutting is the reason why there are electrical shortcomings in this newly constructed skyscraper, and that is what ultimately leads to the fire that breaks out. Because I guess he was basically, so he's the son-in-law of William Holden's character. Would you say he was like a subcontractor?
That makes sense.
Yeah. He was just, for whatever reason, he was in charge of doing all the electrical work, and he cut corners at every turn.
Yeah, didn't care.
Definitely didn't care. He really likes getting drunk and cheating on his wife, even though his wife's smoking hot, played by Susan Blakely. Didn't understand that. You almost think he's going to make it out, but he dies. Like the coward that he is. I did like all of his dialogue with William Holden. Pretty good acting from them. And I asked this question to you earlier, Anton. Do you think they just blamed everything on his character when this was all over?
Oh, I mean, it's no questions asked. They're like, it was this guy's fault, right? They're like, yeah.
Robert Vaughn plays the senator. He dies. I don't know who plays the mayor, but the mayor also dies too. So many characters die.
Yeah, you told me that, and I completely missed it.
I think he dies. I don't think you actually see him fall out of the building, but I think he gets washed away when they blow up the water tanks.
Robert Vaughn, like his character, funny enough, like, or at least like him as an actor, he's been in other films with the leads. Of course, listeners may recognize him. He was in The Magnificent Seven.
Yes, and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was the TV series that he was in, right? Yeah.
Big series.
Yep. I don't want to put him down by calling him a B-lister. I would say as a movie star, he was a B-lister.
I mean, especially compared to the star-studded power that we have in this film.
Right. I'm still cracking up at like William Holden telling his daughter, nothing like this will ever happen again. It's like, dude, you're responsible for most of this.
Yeah, that's crocodile tears. fun little tidbit. So the tower that ended up being built in the Towering Inferno, of the subject matter in Towering Inferno, stood at 1,688 feet. Now, the tallest building in San Francisco is the Salesforce Tower. And did you want to take a crack at how tall that is?
It's not taller than that, right?
It's not. It's not.
Okay. Is it 1,400 feet?
No, no, it's not.
Not even close?
It's
Oh,
like
yeah, I guess San Francisco doesn't have anything that big, right? Because of
not
the earthquakes?
yeah, it's not that big. I mean,
Okay.
it's 1,070 feet.
Okay,
So,
okay.
it's a bit further off. Like, but at the
Yeah.
same time, it's just funny to think of a building that big in San Francisco. It would really stand out.
I mean, it really did in the matte paintings.
Yeah, that's right.
Pretty good matte paintings, by the way. So a lot of that stuff, we'll touch on that, but
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to a actor named Norman Burton. He plays the electrical engineer named Will Giddings. He's the guy that gets roasted early on in the film. He's like he seems to be
Mhm.
pretty good friends with Paul Newman's character. He is in another film that we are covering this season. He is Cut Rate Felix Leiter in Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, he opens the door and then gets caught on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also another it's not funny, but sort of funny part when if you remember when Newman tells William Holden that Will Giddings got burned pretty bad and he's like, "Nah, he'll be fine." And then like 20 minutes later they're like, "He died." And William Holden's like, "Oh."
I think, I don't think that it was meant to be funny, but it was definitely funny.
It's funny in an abstract sense after the fact.
Right, right.
Of just yeah, it's so amusing to both of us just how responsible William Holden's character is for what happens, and they really kind of do make you try to feel sorry for him at the end with his daughter and stuff. It's a little strange.
It's funny because even when you have the police department arriving on the scene saying, "These are all the things that we need to make sure that are in place. These are all the things that are that we can do to ensure that people are safe." And it was very clear how the tragedy could have been avoided.
Yeah.
So it's no doubt Holden's character was to blame.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean when Newman tells him there's a fire on what the 85th floor and he's like that's nowhere near here. There's no need to tell anybody about it at the party. It is a true ensemble cast. Everybody gets their little moment to shine, but
Mhm.
we've mentioned this several times at this point. There are too many characters. It actually works against the film. It's a bridge too far. Like I'll give you an example, Anton.
Mhm.
So we get the senator and the mayor. That's two characters that just could have easily been combined into one. You don't
Yep.
need two of them.
Yep. Senator Mayor. Yep.
Yeah, they throw in a lot of melodrama for even these minor supporting characters. Like if you remember, there was that scene where the mayor is trying to console his wife about the key to like a safety deposit box that she has or something. It's like, why is this in the movie? Who cares?
Yeah.
And then
Gosh.
the big one for me, Robert Wagner's character. I could not even figure out who his character was supposed to be. I think he was like a PR guy. He's the one who's sleeping with his secretary.
Mhm.
I think he was sleeping with Paul Newman's secretary. Is that right?
Yeah, and I really had to look at film notes afterwards to see, what was the context of his character other than
I
it
don't
was
know.
it was just, "Let's focus on a couple," and just so happens that the couple is also, like, engaged in, like, in an affair, and then
Were both of them married though? Like you don't see their
you know,
spouses. It was like
there's no
implying that they were having an affair, but
right. Nothing explicitly stated, but again, like there was some indication that yes, there was some goofiness afoot.
some adultery
Yeah, just some light adultery.
because it was the 70s and you had to be edgy and show adultery. They have a lot of scenes together, like too much. There's probably 10 to 15 minutes about those two characters.
Yeah, and then the way they went out.
I was going
Ugh.
to say, although I think the characters are unnecessary, it does give us probably the most memorable scene in the film where they die.
But it's like it's a interesting message that the film is sending. It's like, well, these were the two characters engaged in adultery, and they both got lit in fire and then thrown out the building. So that's 1974.
They sure got lit on fire, didn't they?
Yeah.
I vaguely remembered this scene, but I was actually shocked at how gruesome it was.
Oh yeah, it's just
He just
The
immediately burst into flames, like he was flammable.
Yeah, and he especially the way that it's posed is like he's like, "Oh, like there's a bit of hope in the scene that he's gonna be able to find some sort of help," and no, it is pretty immediate, like, "Oh,
Yeah.
he's going down."
You get the heroic John Williams music, and then you're like, "Oh, he might make it out." Nope, he catches on fire immediately. He goes through the glass. Pretty good fire effects, by the way. And then
Mhm.
I think it's good direction from John Gillerman because you think, all right, well, she's gonna make it out, right? Nope, no, her death is worse than his. I mean, when she tumbles out of the window, I was pretty shocked for an old movie. Like this is
Well,
pretty gruesome.
it was long too, like, she was like,
Yeah, slow motion.
the fire's getting closer, she's coughing, it keeps getting closer, and then she gets thrown out of the building.
I still don't know why the characters are in the movie, but yes, it's memorable. Their death scene. I mean, it's yeah,
I mean, it's to have characters that I can see it as it's to have characters that you can build really strong sympathy for, but then not feel disappointed because they're part of the main cast, and that's just too depressing. I could
right.
see it as a bit of an adjustment to feeling bad for the characters' deaths that were in the Poseidon adventure and trying to adjust for it because they didn't want the main cast to be gone.
Right. That's a key difference between this film and Poseidon Adventure, right? So in Poseidon Adventure, the main cast is much smaller, which I
Mhm.
think is much more effective for the storytelling. And you do get the main character in the film dies.
Right.
I think the Poseidon Adventure handled that much better. This is why too many characters in this film, Towering Inferno. You mentioned like building sympathy for them, but like I don't even know who Wagner's character was. I mean, I certainly feel sorry for his character. He didn't deserve that. Obviously,
Mm-mm.
no one deserves that except
No
Richard
way.
Chamberlain. Um, but there's so many characters. Like for example, O.J. Simpson's character, right? He's
Right.
like the head of security. He's just absent from in like an entire hour of the film. Like the final hour of the
Mhm.
movie, he's just
Just
completely not even in it.
gone. When he was involved in the scenes, it was moving forward that he was like a competent member of the force,
Yeah.
and it helped to even move the plot forward of Steve McQueen's characters asking the right questions and like
Yeah. I
really.
hate saying
Yeah.
it. His acting was like kind of good.
I mean, look, he was really popular for his performances in films despite his controversy,
Right. Which came later.
which came later.
Look, I don't think it's controversial to say it. He's genuinely hilarious in the Naked Gun movies.
He does
Like
have a bit of
he's great.
he has a bit of charisma to him.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. This is obviously a much more serious role, but he does pretty good in the scenes with McQueen and
And
Newman, right? Like he's pretty good acting alongside them.
well, right, and to say that he is known to have worked on his acting chops. The character for the Terminator, he was considered for that role. So
That's true. I forgot about
like
that.
let's not
Holy crap!
there is a universe where that actually happened. So
Don't you kind of want to see it? Like what
kinda
that would have been?
kinda, but then we all know how his career ended up happening, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It didn't go great.
Yeah, and Arnold did fine.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll say this: they kill off a lot of minor characters in this film.
Mhm.
It does add to the tension because I was shocked at how many characters were getting picked off.
Mhm.
I had no idea who was going to die next, especially after seeing Poseidon Adventure recently with Gene Hackman. You know, he's the lead of that film, and he dies in it. The one that shocked me the most is this is probably not going to surprise you, Anton, but Jennifer Jones.
Oh yeah, super sad. Just a very
Yeah,
emotional scene, especially just what she does like right as she dies.
falls out of the elevator. She's holding a child, and manages to hand the child off to the firefighter before plunging to her
Yeah.
death. Hits the side of the
Mhm.
building on the way down. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's spooky. It's very like I mentioned it before we recorded, but I didn't expect it to be so haunting. Some of the imagery you see get in this film.
It really is shocking, and I have to give credit to not I guess Irwin Allen and the real director of the film, John Gillerman. It's really well handled. Like there's no melodrama when it happens. She just falls, quick scream out of nowhere, and
Mhm.
she's gone. They don't milk it. You know, there's no super slow motion of her character dying. But you're right, haunting is the right word because even the stuff that does have slow motion, like the
Mhm.
guy Wagner and his secretary
Mhm.
burning, it sticks in your mind.
Yeah, and I like to kind of think of, you know, the Poseidon Adventure as like a comparison of how do we deal with death and these kinds of disasters. We talked about it before where Poseidon Adventure didn't steer away from major characters dying. And we didn't get the same level of major characters dying in this film. I think like in the Towering Inferno, for the most part, with just a lot of extras. But it really made it hurt when, especially when you get a character like Jennifer Jones' character died. And I just think that in that sense, it was a bit of a course correction.
Yeah. It's very clear what they were trying to do, right? They were taking everything that they felt worked about the Poseidon Adventure, which to their credit did work very well, and they were amping it up to 11. They had more money, they had more actors, they had two studios to work with, and that's why like I haven't used the word yet,
Mhm.
but it's time to bring it up. It is bloated.
Yeah, it is.
It's a little too much.
Yeah, so official reason number 3, this film is a bit too long.
It is. 2 hours and 44 minutes is lengthy.
Mhm.
Again, comparing this to the Poseidon Adventure and Airport, one of the things we liked about those two films was they were just about 2 hours. Poseidon Adventure was under 2 hours. Airport was a little bit more. They were pretty well paced. I actually felt the pacing of this film was pretty good.
Mhm.
It is just too long. I did think the film moved at a pretty good clip. Once the fire breaks out, everything kind of moves along nicely and the escalations are good. There's too much of everything. There's about an hour of the film we really don't even see the fire. It's just the guests in the ballroom, right?
Yeah, and what I noticed from this film compared to Poseidon Adventure, or just even just when I think of just the film in itself, really, is there's a lot of time spent building the emotional stakes. And it's because of that where I feel like it starts to feel a bit bloated, but I can see why, or at least the intention was to make it really feel impactful when we do see deaths in the film.
Yeah, I understand what they were trying to do, right? Which is build the tension, like you said. But they could have just trimmed down almost everything, right? Like, I was trying to time some of the scenes. Pretty much every scene is 10 or 15 minutes, like every sequence,
Mhm.
right? Like, when Newman's character is searching the blind woman's apartment for the little girl, Angela, and it's full of smoke. I think it
Mhm.
actually is pretty haunting. It is good tension, but it takes 10 minutes.
Yes, it does.
The elevator bit, that takes 10 minutes. Even when they plant the explosives to blow up the water tanks, that seemed to take 10 minutes.
Yeah, so that's 3 major scenes there where there's a lot of time being built out to show the gravity of the situation. Again, a lot of screen time being given to both leads for Steve McQueen and Paul Newman throughout those scenes. I think it would have been shorter if you had just stuck with one major lead.
Yeah. I can't say that I was bored. And like I said, I do think the pacing keeps going despite the runtime,
Mhm.
which seems contradictory on my part, I realize. Because, like, well, how can you think the film was paced okay, but think it's too long? Pacing and runtime are not the same thing.
Yeah, pacing is, do you feel bored while you're watching it?
Yeah, and I wasn't bored, so I do have to give the film credit there. But the one scene in particular that stood out to me the most as being the most unnecessary is the helicopter crash on the roof, right?
Was that a little bit of, okay, we get it, like things are not going well for these people?
Right. McQueen's character asks about the helicopters earlier. Can we get
Mhm.
helicopters on the roof to airlift people off? And they're like, no, the winds are too strong. And then 10 minutes later, they're like, good news, the winds died down a little bit. We're going to try to land the helicopter. And it just immediately, they mess up the landing and it blows up as soon as it hits the roof. They could have just saved an entire chunk of the film just by what
Mhm.
they had originally said, which is, no, the winds are too strong. We can't try that. But it's like, no, we needed more fire effects. We needed more melodrama. It's like, you could just trim out a lot of these little things and really tighten things up. If this was more like, I'd say 210, 215, better movie.
I mean, thinking about it too, 2 hours and 44 minutes. Like, Pat, what were some of, like, even, like, the key themes of this film? Or, like, what were some of the messages that they were trying to tell?
Public safety, I
Right? Like,
I guess.
very, like, on the surface things. It's like,
Yeah.
listen to the architect on like what's important when building the building, and that also like, oh my gosh, like terrible things happen during disasters.
I learned that a building being just up to code isn't enough.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me about just even identifying what are the key themes or messages being told is how do you then look at the rest of the film like accentuating those themes and messages, and if it's not anything deep, then really what you're just consuming is a lot of the drama behind it, the visuals behind it, just stuff happening to elicit emotion. Versus you have a Poseidon adventure, all of the stuff happening, it's very like ask questions about, existence. You have Hackman's character who's a pastor, like grappling with faith. There are a lot of deeper themes that happen in the Poseidon adventure that are a bit more nuanced than what we get with Towering Inferno.
Definitely. Yeah, think about like Ernest Borgnine's character
Oh my
in
gosh.
that film. There's no real dramatic performance like that in Towering Inferno.
No, but in terms of the drama that we do get, it's literally built on, isn't it sad to see people like go through this, and like also sad and haunting to see them also get hit with like this much devastation, which is like, yes, but at the same time, like over the course of 2 hours and 44 minutes, how much of that can I watch before I'm like, I get it, like this is horrible.
Yes. Last reason why this wasn't better, just want to talk about the production. This is what you would call a 4-quadrant movie designed to appeal to
Mhm.
everyone. Men, women, adults, children, right? Anybody could have gone to see this in 1974.
Mhm.
We haven't mentioned his name too much so far in this recording, but I think the director of this, John Gillerman, is worth talking about. He's probably not a name that anybody would recognize today, but he had a pretty interesting career. He started off making B movies in England before moving across the pond to Hollywood. He directed some pretty high profile stuff in addition to this film. 2 years later, 1976, he would direct the King Kong remake. I don't know if you've ever
Mhm.
seen that.
I have. It's been a minute though.
Yeah, it ain't great, but
Mm-mm.
again, it was a big movie. After that, he did Death on the Nile, the Agatha Christie adaptation. And then he directed a film called The Blue Max in 1966. Really cool war movie about a German fighter pilot in World War I. It's got a really fantastic Jerry Goldsmith score. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, but pretty unique kind of a war movie. Check it out if you're interested.
I absolutely will.
Yeah, I know you like yourself some Jerry Goldsmith.
I mean, I'm definitely going to be looking this up and I will report back.
Thank you. Real quick on the runtime. I do think one of the things that benefited the pacing was this is a really great example of just old-fashioned linear storytelling. There's no flashbacks. There's no ambiguity. Actually, one of the things I think that Gillerman and just the screenplay did a really good job of is I was never confused at any point where the characters were in
Mhm.
relation to one another in the building. There was a lot of hopping around on the elevators and the stairs from Newman's character and
Mhm.
McQueen's character. They were going up and down. We had the promenade room, really good spatial geography. I think that's one of the most underrated things about this film is it pretty much unfolds in real time. And despite having so many characters in different locations throughout the building, Gillerman did a really, really good job of just having this all play out visually in a way that was not confusing at any point, at least not to me.
Right.
It's something that could have easily been screwed up, in my opinion, and they didn't do it. This is an incredibly well-made film.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it goes to show that it was very well thought of on the production side of like how do we balance things, because there definitely probably was a push, and I see it in some production notes, that there was a lot of animosity, or at least like Irwin Allen would have wanted more control on the film. But because that there was a nice balance, we did get like a very nuanced look at how to put this film together.
Yeah, for sure. There was one thing that confused me, and it was about the elevator, that outside elevator in the promenade room.
Which we don't see a lot of elevators like that anymore.
No, you don't. I don't think you ever would then either. But um, I was confused by the fact that there was just the one elevator. There was a deleted scene
Mm.
that addressed this, where William Holden's character, Jim Duncan, and the
Mhm.
senator and the mayor, he was explaining how there was more than one outdoor elevator, but
Mhm.
only one was functioning at that point.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so that explains why, like, it was so slow to evacuate people, because a building like that, you would expect there to be more elevators, and there were, but, only one of them was actually working.
Well, my mind went to actually, that's where my mind went to, was the only reason that we have one working elevator is because of the fire. So,
Right.
I mean, I think logically, a lot of folks probably went there too.
Oh, I was one of them.
Yep.
Have to mention the score by John Williams. It's great.
Yep.
It's one of the best things about the film. Just like, the stuff he did, it's similar to what he did on Poseidon Adventure. Just nice to hear vintage John Williams.
Yeah, very well done. Really interesting that, because we talked about how he's so great at hyping up scenes like for like hope, or the hero is about to like conquer, but then because of the nature of the film, it's like actually you have a character going into the fire and crumpling. But
Yeah.
his score is able to capture all of the nuance of emotions going through that. So fantastic job.
He also knows when not to use music, which I,
Mhm.
I don't think there is any music when Jennifer Jones's character dies.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He got nominated for this. We mentioned how the title song won an Oscar, which is baffling. It's terrible. The other two Oscars that this film won were for its cinematography and editing. Not surprising. This is a very good-looking movie,
Mhm.
very well made. I thought really all of the firefighting scenes hold up pretty well.
Mhm.
And in fact, the as far as like the stunts and the effects go, it's a masterpiece. Like the fires, the explosions, the wreckage, everything looks real. There's a lot of matte paintings that get used, like in the when the stairwell breaks and Newman's character is trying to get Jennifer Jones and the kids down.
Mhm.
They're on top of a matte painting. It looks real. When he's in that shaft, it's not an elevator shaft,
Mhm.
but you'd see a lot of these same effects used years later in like Die Hard. It just really holds up.
And I mean, look, there was a lot of practical effects used to create the fire, right? Like to even just create the massive inferno.
It's all they had.
The film used 8,000 gallons of gasoline, 450 gallons of alcohol-based gel. That's a lot of dedication to building like just the spectacle of the fire in this film.
I was really impressed by the miniatures.
Mhm.
Almost every shot held up. Like, yeah, sure, there's a shot or two here and there. You can tell it's a miniature, but
Yeah.
I mean, watching it, the making of documentary on YouTube, I think the miniature of the building that they used was like 40 feet tall or something like that.
It was 70 feet. Yeah,
70 feet. Okay, wow.
70
Yeah, it
feet.
was even great. Yeah, I mean, it looked good. It looked
Yeah,
really good.
it looked really good, and the care was put into just making sure that this looked as believable as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't rely on it too much, right? They didn't overdo anything. They knew the limitations of what they could do. I think the only shot that really looked like an old movie was the blue screen shot when when McQueen is hanging from the helicopter and
Mhm.
he's trying to get on top of the elevator. Like it looked a little janky, but other than that, 50 years on, this film looks great.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it.
I don't have anything to add about the production.
I think we're good there. I mean,
Yeah.
long film, a lot of production, and I mean, I'm sure that some listeners have learned a thing or two about the Towering Inferno.
Yeah, it's a shame it's not streaming anywhere anymore. It was on Max, but they screwed that up.
But fun for listeners, the Thomas Crown Affair is back on Max.
Oh, they only took it down for like a month?
Yeah, but it's back.
Can't make up their minds. They can't figure it out. All right, Anton, let's wrap this up.
Let's do it.
Yeah. What'd you think of this film?
So I thought that this was a really fun film. At the end of the day, it's a very long film. And I mean it in both sense of it had a very lengthy runtime and it felt a bit bloated at times. And I feel like despite the fact that it looked great, that there was some very strong stars and great supporting cast overall, I do think that the film was dragged a little bit considering the amount of time spent to either build the emotional attachment and stakes of the different characters and scenes, but at the same time, like, I do appreciate that attention to detail. I think that for the actual length of the film, I don't think that there was anything really deep or nuanced being really told with the story. Like it was very cut and dry. And that's okay. Like, not all films, I guess, have to have like a message, but I think that it's, for me, like, that's what kind of takes it away from even being like a classic like the Poseidon Adventure, which had a really strong message and emotional depth that really leveraged the strength of the actors in the film. Whereas here we did have very strong actors, but very, again, on the surface themes and direction with where the story was going. But overall, like, fun. I could see this like in 1974 being the film that like everyone was like, you have to go see this in theaters. This film is crazy. And I can see why this film made all the money that it did. And with that, I think that it's a pretty good movie, but one that I am going to be putting at a C plus.
Definitely the pinnacle of the 1970s disaster movie. This must have blown audiences away when it came out. Certainly did at the box office. Has a lot of things going for it. The legendary cast doing it up. The best production value money could buy at the time. Vintage John Williams score. And plenty of thrills on a grand scale. I agree with you. It is way too long. It has way too many characters doing way too many things, but it's still a lot of fun. I really enjoyed watching this. I didn't like it quite as much as the Poseidon Adventure. I don't even think I liked it as much as Airport.
Mm-hmm.
But Paul Newman and Steve McQueen, they absolutely carry this thing home. This is a very exciting blockbuster. It's a true product of its time. They don't make them like they used to. There's no way they could make this film now. It's certainly not a masterpiece, but I understand why it's a classic. It's the kind of movie that I do want to watch on a Friday night with a cocktail or two, and that's exactly what I did. This is pure entertainment, even if it has some flaws to it. I'm very close to you, Anton, but a little bit more favorable. I give this a B minus. I really liked it. I think it's pretty good. It's a good movie.
No, I mean, I think that's very fair. I think that we're in the same ballpark.
Yeah,
I th-
definitely. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, like, again, it's just, for me, if I'm going to be watching 2 hours and 44 minutes of something, what lesson am I learning that I'm going to be asking
Right.
myself over the next few days versus what haunting imagery am I going to have stuck in my head?
Yeah. I mean, everything you're saying is completely fair. Would you recommend it to the listeners?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Like,
same. Same.
it's such a fun film, and it's one of those things where, no, despite the fact that it was released in 1974, it resonated with audiences then, and I'm sure like audiences now, if they saw this in theaters, they'd be like, this is awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely recommend it. And that is it for the Towering Inferno. Anton, this has been fun.
Very fun. Of course, Pat, it's always a pleasure recording with my fellow co-hosts of this show, and of course, it's always fun to be able to dip into these disaster films.
We got more on the slate, that's for sure. But as far as next week, it's going to be Iron Man 3. So back to the MCU, which listeners either tend to love or hate. We will see you then. Take care.